Well, someday I hope you write just a book about the Rangers. I know you've written a book about the old guard. I'd like a book about the Rangers because obviously I have the story wrong. I know more about the Navy than the Rangers. Senator, I had National Security Advisor O'Brien on earlier. I asked him about the WHO statement this morning that the coronavirus originated in bats and that it was not manipulated or constructed in a lab. It is probable, the WHO spokesperson said, likely that the virus is of animal origin. This struck me as spin. It struck the ambassador as spin. What do you say about what the WHO is saying this morning?
The WHO's latest statement is rank spin, Hugh. Let's pay attention carefully to what they said. They are answering a question that is not being asked at the moment. The reports that have circulated for the last week is that all the circumstantial evidence here points to the labs in Wuhan being the source for this virus, not the food market. That does not mean it didn't originate in an animal. We know for a fact, based on Chinese documentaries, that those labs contain bats and other animals, and they research viruses. The most plausible explanation is that through incompetent slipshod safety practices, one of those viruses escaped from the lab and began to infect people in Wuhan. So the WHO is answering a question that is not being asked, which tells you they are trying to spin and cover up for China once again. The WHO is a corrupt, rotten organization.
Let's expand on that, Senator. By corrupt, do you believe that Tedros and others have received direct financial payments from the PRC and the CCP?
I do, Hugh. Going back to Dr. Tedros' time in Ethiopia, where China had one of its first Belt and Road initiatives, corruption, payoffs, bribes, and kickbacks follow fast on the heels of the Belt and Road Initiative. And China aggressively campaigned in 2017 for Dr. Tedros to become the head of the WHO. You have to ask yourself, why would they do that? And looking at the WHO's performance, especially over the last 3 months related to this pandemic, you have to ask yourself, why have they covered up and defended China at every single turn?
Let me ask you if you believe, Senator, if members of the WHO are susceptible to lawsuit in the United States for gross negligence in the mishandling of the virus.
Well, they ought to be, Hugh. And if they're not, then we'll look at legislation that would address that, just like I've introduced legislation that would amend the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act to make Chinese officials susceptible to lawsuit, as we did for the 9/11 victims.
And do you have bipartisan support for that? And how soon can we see that? That could be attached even to the PPP, couldn't it? Because I think the WHO must be made, as the CCP, to account for their actions here. They've killed hundreds of thousands of people.
Hugh, I don't want to do anything that will slow down desperately needed aid for our workers and families and our beleaguered businesses. But in the days and weeks, months ahead, the WHO, like the Chinese Communist Party, must account for its actions.
What about state-sponsored entities, state-sponsored organizations? The PRCW, the CCP of the PRC owns a lot of these state-sponsored enterprises. Should they be liable to lawsuit in the United States as well as the CCP?
So Hugh, I've been free from practicing law for 15 years, clean, and I hate to revert back to a bad habit, but I believe that there's an exception to sovereign immunity doctrines for commercial activities. And so many of China's largest companies are, in fact, owned in part, if not in whole, by the Chinese Communist Party. But of course, my legislation is designed to eliminate that ambiguity by opening up our courts to Chinese officials and entities who are responsible for unleashing this pandemic on the world, whether through their criminal negligence or through intentionally evil acts.
You know, President Nixon opened the door to China. Is it now firmly shut, Senator Cotton?
It's closing pretty rapidly, Hugh. You may have seen the news that Great Britain appears to reverse their decision on allowing Huawei to help build part of their 5G network, or that African nations are turning away from China now. I think you're just going to see the civilized world treat China as the pariah state that it has become.
Should the 2022 Olympics be moved from Beijing?
Right now, I'm not even sure how we can account for it being safe there, much less whether they should have the Olympics.